When I turned 20, my grandfather's old friend, now the country's richest man, showed me photos of his grandsons. He said, "Pick one to be your husband." Without a second thought, I chose Nathaniel Chapman. Everyone in the room was stunned. After all, it was no secret that I had always been hopelessly in love with George Chapman. In my previous life, I used to swear I'd marry no one but him, and I did. I married George, and because of that marriage, he inherited the lion's share of his grandfather's wealth. But after the wedding, he started an affair with my sister. My parents were furious and sent her overseas for school. George thought I was the one who exposed them. From that moment on, he despised me. Women came and went at his side, each one resembling me more than the last. The betrayal broke me. I fell into a deep depression. Later, he secretly replaced my medication with a slow-acting poison. I died, pregnant, alone, bitter, and betrayed. Now I've been reborn. It's time I choose to let them have each other. What I didn't expect was that George had been reborn too. I had just stepped out of Mr. Chapman Sr.'s study when I ran into George and his cousins. The moment they saw me, they scattered. But even as they walked away, they couldn't resist taunting me. "Beatrice, here for George again? You really don't hold back, do you? Aren't you worried your war hero grandpa is rolling in his grave, watching you throw yourself at a man like that?" George, meanwhile, stared at me coldly. "What are you doing here?" he asked sharply. "Trying to get Grandpa to put in a good word for you again? Already brought up how your grandfather saved him in the war, didn't you? Haven't you milked that story enough? You know what? Don't bother. You've embarrassed me enough turning our relationship into gossip. I haven't decided about the wedding. Running to Grandpa won't make a difference." His eyes were filled with contempt and disgust. Just like in my past life, my love had never been enough to move him. I exhaled slowly and replied calmly, "Does this have anything to do with you? Mr. Chapman Sr. invited me. He's throwing a birthday party for me tomorrow." As soon as I finished speaking, George's cousins froze. "Grandpa's hosting a party." "For you?" one of them blurted out. I knew exactly why they were shocked. Mr. Chapman Sr. hadn't involved himself in family affairs in years. The fact that he was stepping in now meant this was more than just a birthday party. He had once told me that on my 20th birthday, I'd have to choose a husband from among the Chapman young men. Whoever I picked would inherit most of his personal estate and take over as the new head of the family. After the initial shock, the cousins turned to George with teasing smiles. "Congrats, George. Don't forget about us once you're in charge," said one. Another added, "With Grandpa backing you, you're set for the big leagues." Then one cousin smirked at me. "Congrats to you too, Beatrice. After all these years of chasing him, looks like you're finally getting what you want. This must feel good." George looked at me with an arrogant grin, then leaned closer and whispered, "But if you want to avoid the same pathetic ending as last time, there's something you need to agree to. Once we're married, we live separate lives. You stay out of my business. That's the only way I'm saying yes." His demand stunned me. I stared at him, suspicion rising. Had he been reborn too? Just then, a kittenish voice chimed in behind me. "Beatrice." My younger sister, Isabella Layton, approached. She wore a mini skirt and a coy smile. Every few seconds, she let out a soft, dainty cough. George rushed to her side. "You shouldn't be out when you're sick." Isabella looked down pitifully. "Georgie, it was Dad's idea. He didn't want Beatrice to come alone." George glared at me. "How pampered can you be? You need a chaperone just to leave the house. Can't you see Bella's not feeling well?" Then he led her away as they walked off. George glanced back and said, "Layton, if you keep acting like this, there's no way in hell I'm marrying you." I chuckled. The truth was, I was the one who didn't want to marry him. On the day of my birthday party, George arrived late with Isabella. Her cheeks were flushed, and his neck had bold red marks. It was obvious what they had been doing. The old me would have broken down in tears, demanding answers, but now I just looked at them briefly and turned back to my conversation. George noticed my eyes glance toward the marks. Instantly, he stepped in front of Isabella to shield her, but I didn't react. My silence irritated him. He forced a smile. "You're not pretending to be all gracious just because you're afraid I won't marry you, are you? Might be for the best. I'm going to be the head of the Chapman family. I can't be expected to stick to just one woman, but since you're being so understanding today, I'll give you a little reward." He pulled out a small velvet box. Just as he was about to hand it to me, Isabella snatched it. "Yes! This is gorgeous. Isn't this that limited edition bracelet? It's impossible to get." George turned to her. "Do you like it, Bella? Then it's yours." "I shouldn't." "This was meant for Beatrix's birthday," she replied with a dry chuckle, her eyes fixed on me. "But if you insist—" "Don't be silly. Take it," George said. "As for her, I'll find something else. As long as it's mine, she'll think it's perfect." His words drew soft laughter from the crowd. Suddenly, memories surged. I once thought everything George gave me was precious. I remember getting caught in the rain and George giving me his jacket. I kept it for years. Later, he caught me secretly smelling it. "How can you be so shameless? Dame no see spat?" That one sentence shattered me. Mr. Chapman Sr. even hit him with his cane. "She's just a young woman. Watch your mouth." But George had laughed. He turned the story into a running joke. Now looking back, it all seemed pathetic. I turned to leave, but George grabbed my wrist. "What's the matter?" upset. "Can't keep the act going?" I yanked my arm free. "Have some respect, Mr. Chapman." He paused, then sneered. "Respect for what? Aren't you desperate to marry me? We'll be living together soon. Drop the act. Who said I was marrying you?" I replied. Silence fell. A second later, the room erupted with laughter. "Who else would you marry?" George asked, scoffing. "You're obsessed with me. Think you could marry someone else? The only other option is Nathaniel. But after his accident, he's always sick. People say he can't even. You'd really spend your life with a man like that." Just then, someone wheeled Nathaniel into the room. He looked frail, unable to leave his chair. Everyone smirked knowingly. I was about to declare my choice, but Mr. Chapman Sr.'s warning echoed in my mind. "Since you've chosen Nathaniel, I respect your decision, but don't say anything yet." Things settle first. I hesitated. Nathaniel glanced at me. For a brief moment, I saw disappointment in his eyes. So I said nothing. I let them laugh and walked away. Later, I shared a car home with Isabella. She sat smugly beside me, flashing the bracelet. "So, what if you marry George?" "You'll never have his heart," she said. To the world, Isabella was sweet and innocent, but in private, her true nature was cruel. I thought back to the time I caught her in bed with George. She had curled up crying and he had shielded her as if I were the villain. I fainted from the shock. After that, she was sent overseas. She later married a wealthy heir and lived a comfortable life. But in this life, I would let her have George. I wanted to see how far she'd get. I smiled slightly. "You're right. What's the point of having him without his heart? I hope you marry him soon. I wish you both a lifetime of happiness." She blinked, caught off guard, then raised a brow and smirked. "Pretend all you want, but George loves me." Not long after Thanksgiving came. My father asked me to deliver gifts to Mr. Chapman Sr. when I arrived at the Chapman residence. I ran into Isabella again. She wore a designer gown dripping in jewelry. "Beatrix, do you like my outfit?" she asked, smiling faintly. "George gave it to me." He told him it was too flashy, but he insisted. I'm the only one who deserves things like this. Annoyance simmered inside me. I tried to walk past her, but she stepped in front of me. I just wanted to share my happiness. "Why are you so cold? I know you're jealous, but love can't be controlled." Tears streamed down her face. I moved to push her aside when suddenly she collapsed to the ground, crying louder. "Beatrix, how could you hit me? I'm your sister." George burst in. "Beatrix Layton, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "Are you seriously mistreating your own sister? Do you even have a heart?" My eyes moved from him to Isabella. Then I let out a quiet laugh. The days following the incident at the Chapman residence unfolded like a well-rehearsed farce. Word spread quickly through high society circles. Beatrix Layton had attacked her delicate sister in a fit of jealousy, and George Chapman had heroically defended the poor girl. No one cared to verify the story. No one asked me what had really happened. After all, I was the woman who had been chasing after George for years. To them, This was just another desperate act from a woman scorned. I didn't bother to defend myself. Let them talk. Let them believe whatever made them feel superior. Their opinions had no power over me anymore. In my previous life, I had wasted years trying to win their approval, their affection, their respect. And for what? To be poisoned and die alone. This time I chose silence. Mr. Chapman Sr. called me a few days later. His voice was calm but firm. He invited me for tea at the manor, and I knew it wasn't just a casual request. When I arrived, he was already seated on the terrace, dressed in a navy blue suit, his cane resting beside him like a silent witness to a life of battles, both literal and emotional. "You handled yourself well," he said without looking up. "Most girls your age would have caused a scene, but you walked away." "Because I've already lived through the consequences of staying," I replied quietly, settling into the chair across. From him, he nodded, finally lifting his eyes to mine. With something in his gaze, a weight, a memory, a silent acknowledgement that both of us knew more than we let on. "The family thinks you've backed down," he said. "That you're no longer interested in George?" "I'm not. You still certain about Nathaniel?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "More than ever, Mr. Chapman." Mr. Chapman studied me for a long moment. "You know what that means? If you follow through with this, the others will turn on you. They won't see you as a young woman in love. They'll see you as a gold digger trying to secure your future through a dying man. Let them," I said. "I'm not choosing Nathaniel for wealth. I'm choosing him because he's the only one in this entire family who doesn't treat people like pawns." "On a chessboard?" The old man let out a dry chuckle. "You really have changed. In your past life, you were ruled by your heart. Now it's your mind leading the way." I leaned forward slightly. "The art's not gone. It's just learned how to survive." Mr. Chapman stood with some difficulty, leaning on his cane. "Very well, I'll make the arrangements. But be careful, Beatrix. George may not be the heir this time, but he's not a man who accepts defeat easily. And Isabella... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what Isabella was capable of. Later that week, I visited Nathaniel. His private wing was quiet, decorated in calm, neutral tones, and filled with books, plants, and soft music playing from an old record player. Was seated by the window, the sun casting a warm glow over his pale face. "Yes." His eyes lifted as I entered. And for the first time, I saw something that resembled hope. "I brought you something," I said, holding out a small hardcover novel. It was the first edition of a book he had once told me he loved. He accepted it with a quiet thank you, his fingers brushing mine briefly. "Do you know what they're saying about me?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. "That you hit your sister," he replied calmly. "That you're desperate to marry George. That you're manipulating Grandpa for the inheritance. Take your pick." Smiled despite myself. "And what do you think?" "I think none of that sounds like the woman I'm looking at." His words warmed something inside me I didn't expect. "I came to see how you're doing," I said, "but also to ask if you're still willing." "Willing to marry me?" Nathaniel set the book aside and looked at me seriously. "Beatrix, you don't owe me anything. I'm not doing this out of guilt or pity. I'm doing this because I trust you. I need someone who's not chasing power or image. I need someone who sees people, not status. And I believe you need that too." He was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "If we do this, people will say terrible things. Let them. And I might not live long enough to give you the kind of life you deserve. Then let's make the time we do have count." A small nod, eyes shining with emotion. "All right, let's do it." That evening, I received a formal letter from Mr. Chapman Sr. announcing our engagement. It was brief, direct, and carried the unmistakable weight of finality. The backlash was immediate. George showed up at my doorstep the very next day. He didn't knock. He banged on the door like a man possessed. When I opened it, he stormed in without waiting for an invitation. "What the hell are you thinking?" he spat. "Marrying Nathaniel? Are you insane?" I crossed my arms. "I don't see how that's your concern. You know exactly why it's my concern. You're doing this to provoke me. I'm doing this because I want. 2, because I finally see you for who you are." George stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Gave you everything. my name, my family's respect. You belong to me. I'm not a thing to be owned. Beatrix, you're making a mistake, he said, voice low and dangerous. You think Nathaniel's going to save you? It's a ghost, a broken shell. He won't last a year. Then I'll treasure every day I have with him, unlike the years I wasted with you. He stared at me, something bitter and twisted in his expression. You'll regret this, Beatrix. No, I said, opening the door for him to leave. Already. Regret not seeing you clearly sooner. As he walked out, Isabella appeared behind him. She looked pale, her usual confident expression replaced by something unreadable. You really are going to marry Nathaniel? She asked. Yes. Why? Because I choose peace. She tilted her head slightly. You think he'll love you? He already does, I said. Not in the way you think, but in the way that matters. Isabella didn't reply. She simply turned and followed George out. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, memories flooding my mind. I remembered my wedding to George, the way he avoided eye contact, how he forced a smile only when cameras were on us. I remembered the cold silences, the excuses, the nights he never came home. And I remembered the last day of my previous life. Alone, dying, betrayed by the very people I had fought to love. This time I would rewrite the ending. The wedding was set for the end of the month. There was no grand ceremony, no parade of guests, just a small gathering in the Chapman garden with Mr. Chapman Sr. as witness and a few close allies. The media wasn't invited. The family wasn't pleased. George didn't attend. Isabella sent a cold handwritten note. Congratulations. May you find the peace you're so desperate for. Nathaniel wore a tailored suit in charcoal gray, his face pale, but composed. When I walked down the short aisle in a simple ivory dress, he smiled. You look like yourself, he said quietly. That's the best compliment I've ever received. We exchanged vows that were honest and gentle. There were no promises of eternal passion or fairy tale endings, just quiet respect, trust, and the desire to protect one another. After the ceremony, as we stood beneath the rose-covered trellis, Nathaniel leaned close. Thank you for choosing me. I didn't choose you to be kind, I whispered. I chose you because you're the only one who makes me feel safe. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Night, I moved into Nathaniel's wing. We lived like companions, two people, building a new version of family. He spent most of his days reading, writing, and sketching in the garden. I began working with Mr. Chapman Sr. on his charitable foundations, managing portfolios that had long been ignored by the younger generation. Word of our marriage continued to ripple through society, most of it laced with disbelief and mockery. But I no longer cared. For the first time, I was building a life. That wasn't rooted in someone else's validation. George, however, wasn't done. He launched a campaign behind the scenes, spreading rumors, manipulating reporters, even trying to challenge the legality of our marriage under the family's succession terms. He claimed Nathaniel was mentally unfit to be the heir, and that I had coerced him for money. Mr. Chapman Sr. was livid. He called a family meeting. All the Chapmans arrived, including George and Isabella. The room was tense, filled with murmurs and side eyes. Mr. Chapman stood slowly, leaning on his cane. I've made my decision, he said. Beatrix is my chosen granddaughter-in-law. Nathaniel is my heir. Anyone who challenges this is welcome to leave this family and its fortune behind. George clenched his fists, but he didn't speak. The room was silent. And in that silence, for the first time in 2 lives, I felt free. The public declaration made by Mr. Chapman Sr. sent shockwaves through the entire family, though no one dared challenge him directly. The silent war had only just begun. Within days of the announcement, George and Isabella began circulating a new rumor that Nathaniel's condition was rapidly deteriorating, and I had orchestrated the marriage to ensure I inherited everything when he passed. Their story was simple and cruel. I was a gold-digging opportunist, and Nathaniel was my dying ticket to power. It might have worked too, if not for Nathaniel himself. Despite his physical weakness, Nathaniel was a man of quiet strength and sharp intelligence. began appearing at family meetings in his wheelchair, participating in business discussions with clarity and poise. He spoke softly but with undeniable authority, dismantling every attempt to undermine him with facts, data, and dignity. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding the neglected Chapman foundations, revived education programs, restructured medical aid campaigns, and implemented transparency policies that brought genuine praise from third-party watchdogs. Our work began to receive media attention, not because of scandal or wealth, but because of impact, real, tangible change. The attacks from George and Isabella only intensified. Late one evening, I received an anonymous envelope. Inside were surveillance photos of Nathaniel with a nurse laughing together in the garden. Attached was a handwritten note. Even broken men can cheat. Are you sure you know who you married? I stared at the images for a long time, not because I believed them, but because I recognized the handwriting. It was Isabella's. Nathaniel was already asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. I slid the envelope into the drawer beside the bed and quietly stepped outside. The night air was cool, crisp with the scent of late-blooming jasmine. I walked down the garden path until I reached the old marble bench under the willow tree, the one where Nathaniel and I often sat together in silence. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. This time I would not be provoked. The next morning I handed the envelope to Mr. Chapman Sr. without a word. He examined the contents, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he said, "This is the work of someone who feels threatened. Keep going. You're winning and they know it." But the threats didn't stop. That same week, Nathaniel's medical files were leaked to a gossip site. The article claimed that his condition was terminal and that he had less than 6 months to live. It painted me as a calculating widow preparing to cash in on her dying husband. The backlash was brutal. Journalists began camping outside our residence. Photographers tried to break through the security gates. Reporters shouted invasive questions whenever I stepped out. Is it true your husband's dying? How do you respond to claims that you're exploiting his illness? Do you plan to remarry once the inheritance is secured? Each question was like a blade, but I refused to flinch. Instead, Nathaniel and I held a press conference. It was a quiet affair, just one podium, a small group of invited journalists, and a live stream for public transparency. Nathaniel wheeled himself to the front, his frailty apparent, but his voice steady. "I am ill," he said. "That is no secret. But I am not weak, and my wife is not my caretaker. She is my partner." Then he looked at me. In my life, I have been underestimated many times, but the greatest surprise of all has been finding someone who saw the man, not the diagnosis. Someone who stood beside me, not out of pity, but out of principle. If you wish to attack someone, attack me. But leave her out of it. She has done nothing but honor this family with her strength and her silence. By the time the press conference ended, the narrative had begun to shift. Not all at once, of course. There were still whispers, still slander, but a few voices, strong ones, began speaking in our defense. Old allies of the Chapmans, respected academics, business leaders, and even beneficiaries of the family foundation stepped forward to share what they had seen firsthand. Then something I never expected happened. George called a truce. He showed up at our residence unannounced, flowers in one hand, an expensive bottle of wine in the other. I opened the door, and for the first time in both of my lives he looked nervous. "May I come in?" he asked. I didn't step aside. "What do you want to apologize for?" lowering his eyes. "I was wrong about everything about you, about Nathaniel." I let pride cloud my judgment. I wanted to believe him, but I had lived this story before. I had seen how easily he twisted the truth. "You tried to destroy us," I said coldly. "You spread lies. You encouraged Isabella to frame me." "I know," he whispered. "I wasn't in my right mind, and now you are." He nodded. "See how happy he makes you?" I just wanted ... I don't know. Second chance to do the right thing. Stared at him, trying to decipher the truth in his eyes. "Let me talk to Nathaniel," he added. "Please, just a few minutes." Against my better judgment, I let him in. They spoke in the study. The door closed, their voices too low for me to hear. After 20 minutes, Nathaniel wheeled himself out, his face calm but pale. "He's leaving," he said simply. "What did he say?" "That he's done fighting? That he wants peace? And that he's sorry? Do you believe him?" "I believe he's lost," Nathaniel replied, "and people who are lost can be dangerous. But I also believe he saw something in you that made him regret everything." That night, I found a letter on my desk. It was from George. It read, "Betrayal. This isn't about forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope in time you'll find it in yourself to live without fear of me. I'm stepping away from the inheritance, from the family board, from everything. This world never belonged to me. It belongs to you now." I read the letter 3 times before tearing it into pieces because I knew him. And George Chapman never surrendered without a plan. Still, the weeks that followed were quiet. The media cooled. The foundations flourished. Nathaniel's health stabilized with new treatments. There were moments when I caught him laughing genuinely, like the pain had loosened its grip just long enough for him to breathe. We built routines, morning walks through the garden, afternoons working side by side in the office, evenings with music and tea by the fire. Sometimes he would take my hand and whisper, "If I had more time, I'd spend every second making you feel." "Seeing you already do," I'd reply. I began to believe we might have a future, but then came the fire. It started in the west wing of the Chapman estate, where the family archives were kept. Decades of records. Original will drafts, private correspondences, and evidence of every major transaction tied to the family fortune. Gone in hours. The fire department suspected arson. No one was injured, but the message was clear. Someone wanted to erase history. Mr. Chapman Sr. summoned me the next morning. His face was grave. "The original copy of my revised will was destroyed in that fire," he said. "And the duplicates were stolen." I understood what he meant. Without those documents, the succession plan was vulnerable. Anyone could claim the rightful heir position, and George was still legally eligible.
"We need to act fast," I said.
He nodded. "There's only one way to secure Nathaniel's place now. A public declaration, one no one can challenge. You want to make it official?" He handed me a folder. Inside was a notarized document naming Nathaniel Chapman as successor with me as co-executive. "Sign it," he said. "It can prepare, because the real storm hasn't even begun." As I signed the papers, a single thought burned in my mind. If George thinks this is still a game, he's about to find out I stopped playing a long time ago, and this time I will win. The public announcement came 3 days later. Mr. Chapman Sr., dressed in his formal military coat and standing tall despite the cane, held a live press conference on the front lawn of the estate, flanked by his legal team and with Nathaniel. At his right side, he read the document aloud for the world to hear. "I, Franklin Alcott Chapman, hereby declare Nathaniel James Chapman as the legal and rightful successor to my personal estate. My title as Patriarch of the Chapman family and as primary trustee of the Chapman Foundation, if any claims to the contrary, shall be considered void." And he turned toward me. "And I appoint Betrayal Chapman as co-executive of all charitable and business affairs, with equal voting rights, executive privileges, and succession protections. She has proven herself loyal, capable, and just. From this day forward, the Chapman legacy stands in her hands as much as his." The crowd was silent for a moment, then the applause began. It wasn't thunderous, but it was steady, sincere. The cameras flashed. Reporters jotted down quotes. And just like that, it was done. We returned to the estate in near silence. Nathaniel reached for my hand as we sat in the car, his grip weak but warm. "Did you ever imagine your name would be on something like that?" he asked, almost teasing. "Not in either of my lives," I said honestly. He smiled softly, the weight of the day tugging at his shoulders, but peace, as always, is temporary. The very next morning, a message was delivered to the estate. No stamp, no signature, just a slip of paper inside a plain envelope. "Turn on Channel 6 at noon." When the clock struck 12, the screen flickered to a familiar face. George Chapman sat in a pristine office dressed in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. Behind him was a logo of the Chapman corporate board. I have refrained from speaking publicly about recent events, he began, his voice composed. Out of respect for my grandfather, I have watched in silence as my family was hijacked by manipulation, but I can no longer stand by. He paused. My brother Nathaniel is a good man, but he is not fit to lead. His condition is worsening, and the one pulling the strings, Beatrix Layton, has made it her mission to isolate, control, and dismantle our legacy from within. My mouth went dry. I have obtained proof that the will revisions were made under coercion, George continued, and that Beatrix has been intercepting medical treatment, preventing Nathaniel from receiving aggressive care in order to prolong his dependence on her. Nathaniel gripped the armrest of his wheelchair. Therefore, I am filing an injunction against the execution of the revised will and requesting a full psychological and medical evaluation of my brother, along with a court-appointed trustee to oversee all Chapman assets until a full investigation can be completed. The broadcast ended with George staring directly into the camera. This is not about revenge. It's about protecting what our grandfather built from vultures. The fallout was immediate. Legal letters arrived within hours. News outlets jumped on the story, torn between portraying me as a mastermind manipulator or a misunderstood figure. Online polls began circulating. Should Nathaniel Chapman remain heir? Is Beatrix Layton abusing her influence? Comment sections exploded, and then came the court order. Nathaniel was to appear for a medical evaluation within 72 hours. Until then, all major decisions related to the Chapman Foundation were to be frozen. Mr. Chapman Sr. was livid. He had not anticipated this level of legal warfare. His age, his health, his authority at all meant nothing in court anymore.
Right.
Let him test me, Nathaniel said calmly as we sat on the terrace. Let them prod and scan and question. I have nothing to hide. It's not you I'm worried about, I admitted. It's what they'll do to twist the truth. You know how this family works? They'll drag your name through the mud, and they'll do it with a smile. He nodded slowly, his eyes tired. Then, we play their game, but we play it better. We prepared in silence. I gathered documents, emails, medical reports, security footage. I contacted every donor, every beneficiary of the foundation, compiling character statements. I reactivated my old network. People who had once stood by me even during the worst moments of my first life, they were shocked to hear from me. Some thought I was dead. Others thought I had lost my mind. When I told them the truth, most believed me without hesitation, because George had made too many enemies, because the name Beatrix Layton still held weight in places where kindness had once been currency. The day of the hearing arrived in gray silence. Rain coated the city in thin silver, and the courthouse was surrounded by press and protesters. Some waved signs in support of George. Others chanted my name. Nathaniel and I entered through the back, escorted by private security. The courtroom was sterile, clinical. A judge presided from a raised bench, and both sides were flanked by lawyers in stiff suits and sharper eyes. George sat across the aisle from me, his expression impassive. Isabella wasn't with him. Interesting, I thought. The hearing lasted 6 hours. George's legal team presented confidential recordings of Nathaniel coughing violently, emails that looked like I was filtering his medical directives, financial audits suggesting I was rerouting funds. Sat still, refusing to blink. When it was our turn, I stood. Your Honor, I said clearly, I am not here to plead my innocence. I am here to present facts. I laid out our evidence, doctor's notes signed by independent specialists, time-stamped security footage, bank records with full transparency, and most importantly, testimony from Nathaniel himself. I choose her, he said, simply when asked if he was of sound mind. I trust her, and I love her. The judge remained stone-faced. The final witness changed everything. Mr. Chapman Sr. entered the courtroom slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, but standing taller than any of us. I have been silent too long, he declared. I have watched this family tear itself apart, and I take responsibility. But let me say this clearly. George has lied. Nathaniel is my rightful heir. Beatrix is my choice to carry on our legacy. If this court overturns my wishes, then you are not protecting justice. You are protecting ego. Gasps echoed in the room. George stared, stunned. The judge adjourned for the day, stating a decision would be announced in 48 hours. We left the courthouse without a word. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. His hands trembled as he held his tea, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you to this," he said. "You won't," I promised. "No matter what happens, we've already won." "How?" "'Cause we didn't become them." In the early hours of the morning, I received a call. It was from Isabella. Her voice was shaky. "I need to talk to you. It's about George." She refused to say more, only that we had to meet in person. "Alone?" I agreed, but asked our security to tail the location from a distance. We met at an empty rooftop cafe downtown. Rain still fell softly, and the air smelled of cold concrete and regret. "He's losing it," she said as soon as she sat down. "You don't know what he's planning. He thinks if he takes out Nathaniel, he can regain everything." "What do you mean, take out?" "Think he's found someone willing to accelerate Nathaniel's decline." My blood ran cold. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I never wanted it to go this far," she said, tears rising. "It was always just a game. I never thought he'd..." "Where is he now?" "He's at the docks. There's a meeting. Midnight." I left without another word. We found George that night, cornered in a warehouse, surrounded by men with no names and thick accents. Mr. Chapman Sr. had activated his own silent network, meant from a time when justice wasn't clean, but effective. George was arrested before sunrise. The morning after, the judge's ruling was announced. The injunction was lifted, the will upheld, Nathaniel's position secured, and George Chapman was declared legally unfit to represent any Chapman interest ever again. When I brought the news to Nathaniel, he simply nodded and closed his eyes. "I guess we won," he said quietly. "No," I replied, brushing the hair from his forehead. "We survived." I felt even better. The weeks following George's arrest felt like waking up after a storm. Roofs blown off, trees uprooted, water damage on every floor, but the house still standing. And for the first time in both my lives, I didn't feel like I was simply surviving inside a broken home. I felt like I had rebuilt it brick by brick. Nathaniel's health, while still fragile, stabilized. The doctors were amazed at how much his body had responded to the new treatment protocol. He began physical therapy again, determined to regain some independence. Every inch of progress mattered to him and to me. He refused to be seen as a dying man. He was a living one. One morning, as we sat together in the garden, he looked up at me from his wheelchair, his eyes serious beneath the soft sunlight. "You ever wish you could go back and change everything?" he asked. I smiled faintly. I did. I used to dream about it. My first life, I thought love was enough to fix everything. In this one, I learned love without self-respect is just surrender. Now, no, I wouldn't change a thing. He nodded slowly. Even the pain, especially the pain. It's what taught me who I am. That afternoon, Mr. Chapman Sr. announced his full retirement from all public affairs. The moment was quiet, just close friends and board members. He handed over all final documents to Nathaniel and me with a firm handshake and a look that said, more than any speech could, "You two saved this family," he said. "Not with wealth, not with power, but with dignity." He left the estate the next morning for his coastal villa, alone as he had always preferred. The Chapman Foundation grew under our joint leadership. We restructured the family business to remove old corruption, promoted new executives based on merit instead of bloodline, and redirected over $20 million into public infrastructure and education programs across underfunded cities. Every initiative carried the Chapman seal in both of our signatures. The public began to see something they had never seen before in this dynasty: humility. One day, during a community event, a little girl no older than 8 approached Nathaniel. With a handmade card, she had drawn him in a wheelchair next to a woman with long hair and a crown made of flowers. At the bottom, in colorful letters, it said, "Thank you for helping my mom get a job." Nathaniel stared at the card for a long time, then pulled the girl into a gentle hug. "I will never forget this," he told her. "Neither will I thought silently. But peace, as always, is never permanent. One evening I found a letter slipped under our door. No name, no signature, Just a sentence. You didn't win. You just bought time. I showed it to our security team. They analyzed it, dusted it, investigated its origin, but nothing turned up. My first instinct was George. But George was still in custody, awaiting trial on multiple charges: fraud, attempted conspiracy, and embezzlement. His legal team had shrunk. His support evaporated. Even Isabella had stopped visiting him, which raised a more disturbing question. If not George, then who? There were whispers among the board of another faction, quiet but bitter. Cousins, uncles, third-degree nephews who had been cut off or pushed aside during the restructuring. Men who had lost power, and more importantly, lost access to the fortune. But I didn't let it shake me. They had already taken one life from me. They weren't going to get another. I focused on what mattered. One afternoon, Nathaniel surprised me. He had been practicing walking short distances with a cane, and as I was coming back from a conference, I found him standing near the piano in the music room, breathing hard, but smiling wide. I was terrified. I said, rushing to him, "You should have called someone." He caught his breath, chuckled softly. "I wanted to stand the first time I gave you this." Then he held out a box. Inside was a ring. Not flashy, not expensive, a simple platinum band, with our initials engraved on the inner curve. "I know we're already married," he said, "but I never proposed the way I wanted to, not with fear hanging over us, not with everyone watching. So this is me asking, not as the Chapman, not as a patient with a prognosis, but as the man who has watched you walk through hell and still choose kindness. Will you marry me again? Not for status, not for legacy, but for us." I didn't answer right away. I just leaned down and kissed him. That night, we sat by the fire, wine in our hands, the silence between us full of peace. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked. "Every day. And I think maybe it's time we've built something that isn't just about the Chapmans. Something just ours, like what? A school, maybe for women who lost their voice. A fund for whistleblowers. A home for survivors of families that failed them." He turned to me with a soft smile. "That sounds exactly like you. And you. I'd like to live long enough to see it. Maybe walk across a stage again. Maybe give a lecture on what it means to fight with dignity." We sat like that for a long time, just imagining a future no one thought we deserved. Weeks passed. George's trial began. He pleaded not guilty to most charges, but was convicted on 3 counts. He received a 7-year sentence with the possibility of parole. Isabella never testified. In fact, she'd disappeared from the public eye entirely. Rumors swirled. She'd fled the country, but she'd married someone powerful overseas. She'd entered rehab. I never followed up. She'd already stolen too much of my past. I wouldn't give her my future. Nathaniel and I renewed our vows that spring. A small ceremony, no cameras, just 30 people who had stood by us when it was hardest. I wore a light blue dress. He stood beside me, taller than he had in months, his cane in one hand and mine in the other. "I vow to stand beside you not as a shadow of what I was, but as the man I am becoming," he said. "I vow to never stop choosing you," I replied, "even when it's hard, especially then." The applause was soft, the air was warm, and I knew deep in my chest that this time the ending would be different, because this time I hadn't begged to be loved. I hadn't sold myself short. I hadn't twisted into knots to fit a mold I was never meant for. This time I had walked through the fire and come out holding the hand of the only man who never asked me to burn for him. Weeks turned into months. Nathaniel's health plateaued. Never perfect, but never worse. The foundation expanded internationally. We opened our first women's recovery center under a new name, the Leighton House. And one morning, as we sat watching the sunrise over the eastern garden, Nathaniel rested his head against my shoulder and whispered, "If this is the last chapter of my story, then I'm glad I got to write it with you." I smiled, kissed his temple, and replied, "No, my love. This isn't the last chapter. It's the beginning of the one we were always meant to."